23 Clemson players have tested positive for COVID since they and the staff returned to campus 2 weeks ago. According to the school, the majority of those were asymptomatic. Meanwhile, LSU has placed a large number of its football players in quarantine in an effort to slow the spread of the virus. Though not all players in isolation have tested positive, LSU began voluntary workouts on June 9th. Kansas State has suspended all football workouts for 2 weeks. As of Friday, 14 of the 130 athletes tested were positive for COVID-19. They've been placed in self-isolation for at least 10 days. And then at UCLA, 30 current players and one former player have signed a document that asks for third-party health officials to be put in charge of making sure safety guidelines are being followed at the school. Players are scheduled to return to campus on July 6th. So there's all of that. And here they are. Laura Rutledge is back and Paul Finebaum is here. And Laura, we've been talking about this now for months. It feels like the last few days have been really rough. What are you hearing from the people you talk to?
Yeah, I think you just said it, Greeny, in the best way possible. It's been rough. I think the other part of this is that I'm hearing that there are many more cases that we don't know about, and that's to be expected. But I think this is more widespread and maybe a larger volume of cases than people even realize within college football. It's interesting, too, because you brought up that UCLA story. I'm getting much more of a sense of concern from some of the players that I'm talking to that wasn't there even a couple of weeks ago. And there's actually some players who were trying to figure out how they could write a letter to the NCAA expressing their concern. But here's the problem. They want to try and remain anonymous because they're concerned that all of a sudden maybe a university would say, hey, if you're that worried about this, then just don't even play. We can go ahead and quarantine you and you don't even have to be a part of this. It's this double-edged sword where they're worried for their health, but they also still really want to play football and want to be given a fair chance to compete. This will continue to be very complicated, and I think you'll see a lot more schools have to enforce some quarantine, and yet still in all of this, most of the people that I talk to, ADs, coaches, still are planning on starting college football on time.
Laura, I know this is a complicated question, but again, we've been talking about this and working our way towards this for months. Has this thus far been, in your view, greater than, worse than what most people involved were expecting? Has this exceeded what they were expecting to happen?
I think it's about what they expected, but maybe not as immediate of a spread. And look, I mean, I can't exactly speak for every single person, but the large amount of people that I have talked to thought that there would be positive tests. I mean, they were expecting that. That's why they had all these plans in place for quarantine and ways to try and keep these players safe and healthy. But until it was going to happen, they didn't exactly know how they were going to handle it and how people would react. And I think the other big piece of this, and I know Paul has more on this too, the parent side of it, the concern amongst the parents. Now this is becoming very real, and I think that changes the level of concern.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think that's really the issue. The parents are starting to call coaches around the country and say, how are you going to keep my son safe? I know of at least one school where the head coach had to have a Zoom meeting, Greeny, with his team to try to calm everyone down because it's getting rather chaotic. And Laura's right. There are several double-digit cases that I have heard of at major places that we are not being told about. And I think it's a situation where college football, if they don't get control of it now, they may lose control of it. And remember one important thing. These are voluntary workouts, and there are no students on campus. What's going to happen if students start pouring onto campuses? And that's a problem that presidents are facing all across the country this morning.
Most schools that I'm aware of are planning on bringing their students back to campus, the regular students, I should say, not just the athletes, in the fall, but we'll see if that remains the case. Paul, transparency is a huge word in our culture today. What are your expectations relative to that and the college football season?
So far, it's been very disappointing. The ones who are being transparent are making the lead story on ESPN every afternoon and morning. The ones who aren't are underground somewhere. But I think it's time for there to be more. I mean, this is a critical situation. You can't keep this within. And by the way, most of this will get out because these players are texting back and forth with buddies at other schools. So it won't be down low for long. And the real problem, I think, for college football is stemming this negativity. It's not over yet. Laura's correct. Every AD is saying the right thing, but do they really believe it? Some of the ones I'm beginning to hear from really don't believe it any longer, although they're communicating it publicly. We're going to play football. Are we, though?
Laura, quickly, what are you looking for now? What's the next step in this? What are you keeping an eye on today?
Well, let's keep track of what happens when Oklahoma brings their players back, scheduled for July 1st. Lincoln Riley was a little concerned about how all of this would go. Let's see how they monitor things. I think you just have to look and see what's reported and how these schools are keeping their players safe. That just containing as much as possible is going to be a big key here for things to start on time or to start at all.